Hello again. I'm back doing another teaching video. My name is Charles Sabo. Continuing the teaching videos on the book of Isaiah. If you're following the videos here on YouTube, I've already completed through chapter 14. Today I'll be doing the short chapter. It's a short chapter, chapter 15. As I was expressing beginning in chapter 13, chapter 13, I believe, through 23, are woes of wrath against, I believe it's 7 or 8. I think it's 7 different empires or groups of people. Now, 15 and 16 talks about the Moabites, okay? And so we're going to go into chapter 15 first and discuss what Isaiah is implying here in chapter 15. Now, this is taken from the PDF file of the book that I wrote in 2018 and 19, published it in January of 2020, and it's on the market now as a Bible commentary, available to universities, seminaries, to you. You can pick it up on eBay, you can pick it up on Amazon. I still have several copies that I might sell cheaply, very cheap. Anyway, I'm going to go into chapter 15. I give a brief introduction here. And if you have questions, please ask. Hit like down below if you like my teachings. And subscribe to my channel to receive notifications of other videos that are coming out. So, I'll proceed to read. The history behind Moab and Israel goes back to Lot, who was the nephew of Abraham. Moab and Ammon were 2 sons of Lot who were from ancestralized births between Lot and his 2 daughters. You can read about that in Genesis 19:36 through 38. Now, the Moabites became great enemies of Israel when Balak, the king of Moab, hired Balaam, the prophet, hoping that he could curse Israel. That's in Numbers 22 through 25, those chapters. Now, Eglon, king of Moab, oppressed Israel in the days of the judges. You read about that in Judges 3:12 through 30. During the time of Saul and David, Israel was able to establish firm control over Moab, but the later kings of Israel and Judah were not always able to keep the Moabites under restraint. Now, God told Israel in Deuteronomy 2, verse 9, that they were not to destroy Moab and take their land. The Moabitess Ruth became the future great-grandmother to King David when she married Boaz, who was the kinsman redeemer of Naomi. Now, you can find that in Ruth 4, 1 through 22. Now, David later entrusted his mother and father to the king of Moab while he was a fugitive fleeing. He, being David, was a fugitive fleeing from King Saul. And that's in 1 Samuel 22, 3 and 4, verse 3 and 4. If you can recall, Jesse, David's father, was the grandson of Ruth the Moabitess. Okay. Now, the captivity of Moab was to come because they worshipped other gods and because they mocked Israel when they were going into captivity. Okay. Now, we can read in Ezekiel 25, verses 8 through 9. Thus saith the Lord God, because that Moab and Seir do say, behold, the house of Judah is like unto all the heathen. Therefore, behold, I will open the side of Moab from his cities, which are his frontiers, the glory of the country, Beth Jashimoth and Baal-meon and Kiriathaim. Now, the Lord was announcing a judgment against Moab through Ezekiel, but he first prophesied it through Isaiah here. Now, I'm going to read you beginning in verse 1 now. The burden of Moab, because the night Ar of Moab is laid waste, because in the night Ar of Moab is laid waste and brought into silence. Now, because in the night Ker of Moab is laid waste and brought to silence. All right, that's verse 1. Now, Ar, or Hebrew word Kor, was a city of Moab, which was located south of the Arnon River It was perhaps even the capital of Moab. The mentioned Kir is derived from the Hebrew Kerur Chariz, also known as Kerur Haresh, which equals walls of potsherds, which was the other of two chief strongholds in Moab with Ar. The prophecy of the judgment of Moab was to happen in one night within these two stronghold cities. Okay, so we're talking about Ar and Kir. All right, Kir and R. I had the R highlighted. I should have highlighted Kir here. Anyway, could change that in my edits. So you can see on this map, here's Kir right here, right? And then we're looking for R, should be right here, Arnon. All right, so we're going to proceed to read verse 2. He has gone up to Bajith and to Daban, the high places, to weep. He being a country, right? If it's she, it's a church or religious entity. He being a country. Moab shall howl over Nebo and over Medeba. On all their heads shall be baldness and every beard cut off. Now, the word Bajith means house, which is to be considered a house of worship. Because Isaiah then refers to the city of Daban, we can assume that this house of worship was in Daban. Isaiah also refers to the high places as if this house called Bajith is in the high places in Daban. Looking to the map, we can see that Daban was located north of the Arnon River. Okay, there's Daban right here, right? There's the Arnon River right here, right? Okay, now, north of the Arnon River. Okay, the Moabites, will flee southeast to their house of worship, Bajith in Daban, to cry or howl to their gods over the captivity and destruction of Nebo and Medeba. There were two waves of captivity that came through Moab. Initially, the Assyrians came through and decimated the land of Moab, but a remnant was left behind. All right. The Assyrians were known for their cruelty as well as their tactics of shaving their captives, thus removing their glorious hair. Right. The Babylonians, later swept through Moab as they were sweeping through the entire region between 605 BC and 586 BC. Against Moab, well, I'll read you Jeremiah 48:1a. Against Moab, thus saith the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, woe unto Nebo, for it is spoiled. Now, remember, the Assyrians had already been through and done by the time Jeremiah started writing, and Jeremiah was writing of the Babylonians, okay? So now, and Isaiah obviously was writing before and during the Assyrian captivities. Now, I'm going to go into verse 3. In their streets they shall gird themselves with sackcloth on the tops of their houses, and in their streets everyone shall howl, weeping abundantly. Now, traditionally, someone desiring to show his repentant heart would often wear sackcloth because it was a coarse material usually made of a black goat's hair, making it quite uncomfortable to wear. This has been known for many millenniums as a public sign of repentance and humility before God, or in the case of the Moabites, their god Chemosh. The weeping and howling would be everywhere Moabites could best openly be seen by their god, indicating that they were needing his help, whether it be from the rooftops or to the openness of the streets. Now, that whole sackcloth, it became tradition for any religious activities. Now, obviously, even before Abraham, they were wearing sackcloth during the times of probably Noah. Afterwards, maybe Job, if you remember, was before Abraham. And so it became tradition to wear sackcloth and suffer as you're praying or moaning or mourning and begging your God for mercy and quote. So the other religious cults or occults adopted the same tradition. Okay. Now, Isaiah 15:4, and Heshbon shall cry, and Eliah, their voice shall be heard even unto Jahaz. Therefore the armed soldiers of Moab shall cry out, his life shall be grievous unto him. We're talking the soldiers of Moab. Assyria and Babylon came from the north and hit the northern cities of Moab first, which consisted of Heshbon and Eliah. The soldiers, being ripped apart by the Assyrians and Babylonian war machines, were prophesied to cry out in their slaughter so that their screams would be heard as far as Jahaz. Okay? Now, that's basically what that verse is pertaining to. All right? So it was going to be brutal. Isaiah 15:5. My heart shall cry out for Moab, his fugitives shall flee unto Zoar, and heifer of 3 years old, and his fugitives shall flee unto Zoar, and heifer 3 years old. For by the mounting up of Luhith, with weeping shall they go it up. For in the way of Horonaim they shall raise up a cry of destruction. All right. So the heart of Isaiah mourns for Moab. Why? Well, most likely because he understands them to be cousins to the children of Israel. Both Moab and Jacob, Israel, had Terah as their great-grandfather, right? So Jacob, Israel, and Moab, their great-grandfather was Terah, right? And then obviously Lot was a son of, and I'm not going to go there, I should have. The fugitives, ironically, Lot was Abraham's nephew. Okay, so there you can see that. Like trying to think of Lot's dad. I've written about him, so shame on me for forgetting. The fugitives, ironically, will flee to Zoar, while Moab's father Lot fled from Zoar into the mountains. That's in Genesis 19:30. The cries of Moab will be the same sound as the 3-year-old heifer. Mature. Apparently, the moan of a heifer has a distinctly different sound from the bull, right? Zoar was close to the Dead Sea, while the cities of Luhith and Horonaim were into the higher elevations of the mountains in Moab. Okay, verse 6, I can read this with verse 5. For the waters of Nimrim shall be desolate, for the hay is withered up, the grass fails, there's no green thing. In the first map on page 110, we can see the waters of Nimrim, which were the southeast shores of the Dead Sea, while Luhith sits up higher into the mountains. That's up here. All right. And then, where was I? Looking for that for you. Luhith, there you go. Right there. Okay. The waters of Nimrim were probably natural irrigation to the land at one time. Within this prophecy, it seems to indicate there will be a desolation of the plant life. This does not mean it dried up, but that the sea salt may have increased in the waters of Nimrim, which no living thing could exist. You can take that into consideration. Verse 7, therefore the abundance they have gotten, that which they have laid up, shall they carry away to the brook of the willows. Interesting verse. Instead of enjoying the abundance which the land had provided them, the Moabites would carry what they could with them to Babylon. Now, this is the second time they were taken captivity. The first wave with the Assyrians, this doesn't pertain to, and I'll show you why. In Psalm 137:2, by the rivers of Babylon, there we sat down, yea, we wept when we remembered Zion. We hanged our harps upon the willows in the midst thereof. All right? So when Israel was taken captivity, they wept in the willows of Babylon, right? So obviously, the brook of the willows of Babylon is what it's pertaining to here in verse 7, their second wave of captivity. Now, verse 8, For the cry is gone round about the borders of Moab, the howling thereof unto Eglam, and the howling thereof unto Beeralim. Isaiah announced that the cries of howls will not be something felt in a few remote cities, but all of Moab will mourn for their losses. The verse indicates that God's wrath would be nationwide. Okay? Now, I'd show you that up on the map, but you can rewind and look at it yourself. The waters of Daman shall be full of blood, for I will bring more upon Daman, lions upon him that escapes of Moab, and upon the remnant of the land. Here's where people screw up, and I'll show you how. First of all, the location of the waters is believed to be a description of God of what the Moabites are to expect. This description by God, of what the Moabites are to expect. All right, the waters of Daman. The word Daman is translated from the Hebrew word Damon, which is translated riverbed or silence. The riverbed will be filled with blood when the lions come. All right. Now, notice on the lions come upon those that escape, because this is being told before the Assyrians came. The Assyrians would come, and those that escaped the Assyrians would be taken by the lions. Now, what lions? All right. The remnant left behind by the Assyrians were destined to be invaded again by the lions called Babylon over 100 years later. The first of the four kingdoms of Daniel's 7 prophecy was Babylon, which was described as a lion with eagle's wings. On Babylonian engravings, they represented their kingdom as an image of a lion. A lion is warlike, supreme in power, dominating, and sovereign. This has been, and even today, an allegorical representation for power. The lion is able to coil on other animals with great brutality during his attack. Lions were found adorning the famous Ishtar Gate of Babylon. Old Babylon monuments have been found in engraved emblems consisting of a lion with eagle's wings. This can be discerned to represent that the kingdom was rapid in its conquest. That's Babylon. Now, go back to the verse. For the waters of Daman shall be full of blood, because I will bring more upon Daman. More. The lions will come upon them that escape the Assyrians. All right? So, Isaiah prophesying something, this is before and during the times of the Assyrians coming. When the Assyrians came, this prophecy was probably out already, and they're catching wind that this is going to be terrible that's coming upon them. Knowing the Assyrians are coming through, anybody that escapes the Assyrians is going to be taken by the lion, Babylon, afterwards, 100 years later. All right? And so that is a short chapter, only 9 verses in chapter 15. So it's a woe unto Moab, and Moab's future was dismal. As you study chapter 16, you'll see. And so stay tuned. We'll go over chapter 16. Thank you for joining me today. May God bless you. And hit like down below and subscribe to my channel. In the meantime, God bless.